Here's another one you don't want to hear. Frankly, if you want. 1, 2, 3, set, go.
You are tuned into the Power Chord Hour right here on 107.9 WRFA, as well as the Power Chord Hour podcast. However you're checking this out, thank you for checking it out. I'm your host, Anthony Merchant. Today, very excited. I have Scott Lucas of Local H. We're going to be talking the 20-year reissue of the 2004 classic, Whatever Happened to PJ Souls. They'll be out here on September 13th, as well as a fall tour in September and October. And if you are in the Jamestown listening area, they also have 2 headlining shows I'm very excited for up in Buffalo and Cleveland, September 15th and 16th. So quick little drive up the road from Jamestown to go check out Local H. But yes, Scott, very excited to talk to you. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I've been excited. I've been a fan for a long time. I love this record. I'm really excited to talk 20 years about it with you. And I guess to start off, because we're kind of talking about that era of the band, what does 2004, if you're looking back, like, what would you describe that era of Local H? Being in Local H in 2004, how do you look back on that era 20 years later? Because I also think that's interesting. You're no longer in it, so now removed and looking back at it.
Right. I mean, that was us sort of like divorcing ourselves from major labels, and also just saying, we're not going to be the kind of band that's going to fit in with where radio is, because it was all kind of like I don't know, people in shorts and no necks and, rap rock. And then if you wanted to have a hit and you weren't that, it had to be some kind of ballad, or not even ballad, whatever that kind of like Pepsi free commercial music is. I mean, it was just stuff that we didn't want to do. And at the same time, there was a lot of really exciting stuff happening, and independent music and with garage rock. And so it was just kind of us wanting to get away from all that and be truly independent. And we made this record that we were financing ourselves by going on tour all the time. And then we'd come back and work on it. So it took about a year off and on to make the record. But just kind of a real handmade, painterly, hand knit record that I really love.
It's a great album. How long after Here Comes the Zoo came out did you and I realized there's like an EP in between there, but when did, I'm sure even then you didn't know it was going to be the PJ Souls album, but kind of how long after that record did you start kind of writing and thinking about this? Like where is kind of the beginning of Whatever Happened to PJ Souls? Where does that kind of start? Where's the writing kind of begin there? I
mean, I kind of knew while we were mixing Here Comes the Zoo that rock, as the way I was doing it, was over. Like, I went to go see the Strokes while we were mixing it, and I suddenly went, oh no, this is the future, we're done. So it was kind of like, I can't play that game anymore. I can't play, not that I ever could, but I can't play with those stakes. I can't play in those big leagues. Let's just go back. Let's retreat and let's make music the way we want to make it, and not not that we made records that we didn't want to make, but there was sort of a game connected to those kind of records where you were just kind of like writing a hit single. It's a game. It's like, can we make you listen to this song even if you don't want to listen to it? And when we made PJ Souls, I was like, I don't really want to do that anymore. I was never really that good at it, and I'm tired of pretending. So we just wanted to make, I don't know, I don't want it to sound like the records we made before PJ Souls are shit records, because they're not. I'm completely proud of them. But there was something about this record that it was like, this is us. This is as good as we can do it. And it's going to have to be completely on our terms. And there were a lot of people that were listening to us at the time that wanted a more hard rocking record. And And this isn't that, you know, it's got a lot of stuff going on.
And I think that's very interesting. Like, I mean, that sounds like I'm getting where you're coming from, the influence of writing the record. Would you say that it's a concept record in any way of like, you know, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, like disdain of the record industry, or like you're saying, trying to play that game and stuff, or did it just more influence the songs? You know what I mean? Like, is there a concept?
Yeah. I mean, there is, but I wouldn't say it's a stronger concept record than something like Pack Up the Cats or even As Good as Dead. And certainly not a stronger concept record than Hallelujah I'm a Bum, which we did a few records later. But just this idea that like, if you're not in this circle of, you know, like California songs, it's like if you're not in the circle of what goes on in LA or what goes on in New York, you're nothing, you know. Or, you know, these people, like we used PJ Souls as our template, as our North Star on this record. Just this thing like, well, whatever happened to her? Like, what is she doing now? It's like she's living a life, you know. She made all these great movies, and she's this, I guess, cult figure, you could say, that so many people love. And it's like, you don't need everything that this person has in their lives. They don't have to sacrifice everything for you, you know? So, I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And you got to remember at the time, like on MTV, there were all these shows like, you know, Where Are They Now? And right. And so there was all that kind of junk. And so there was a lot of reaction to that, just to the very nature of fame and the fact that it really didn't have anything to do with why I wanted to get into music in the first place. I mean, honestly, I hate having my picture taken, and I get into this job, and it's like, it's only gotten worse. Let's take your picture. It's like, it's one fucking thing I don't want to do, you know? So it's all this stuff that you have to do that has nothing to do with it. And so this record was sort of a way like we're not even going to work with a major label or spend a lot of money and go work with a major producer. We're not going to do any of that stuff. We're just going to make a record on our own terms in our own backyard.
You know, I want to get into that too, with obviously PJ Souls. I mean, does play, you know, the title, the album artwork, the song and all that. When did that kind of come in? Like, I mean, was that an instant, like the Whatever Happened to PJ Souls? I mean, was that pretty instant into writing? Were there other like titles and stuff before that and it came later? And I mean, on top of that too, did the song come first or the title for the album? You know, where did kind of PJ Souls come into all of this? Where did that idea, concept?
I don't know. She's just been a hero of mine, you know, since Halloween and Rock and Roll High School. So it's just kind of, I don't know if that was the idea, but, you know, I mean, I remember writing that song in my old apartment and, you know, standing next to my couch, basically writing that song. So I don't know. It's really hard to remember. It's just, that's somebody that, you know, I've been living with in my pop culture consciousness for forever, it seems. And I don't know. I mean, you know, we had a lot of songs and some of them had been left over from the songwriting sessions for Here Comes the Zoo. And so all these songs started to connect together in really interesting ways. You know, in some ways it was sort of like our House of the Holy or Physical Graffiti. It was just like older songs were like connecting with new songs, and they all had different colors to them. And we just embraced that, you know? And when I said we didn't want to work with big producers, like we were working with a producer, we were working with our pal, Andy Gerber. So, you know, we'd go into his studio and like anything we wanted to try, he was determined to make that happen. So just every song had like a different guitar tone from like the verse even to the chorus, or, you know, it just like everything we wanted to do, we did. And it drove us all a little crazy. So, I mean, there's just no way we're going to make a record like this again. This was a one and done type of situation.
You brought something up there that I like to talk about with musicians, like the part of being the recording the album. Like, do you enjoy that? Because there's people who want to go in, they want to record the record. And obviously they want to sound good, but you want to record the record and kind of get out of the studio fairly fast. There's other people who will spend 5 days EQing a snare drum and they absolutely love it and it's a blast. Like, where do you fall on that spectrum? Like, is doing that, could you spend days and weeks and months in a studio tedious and just kind of playing with everything? Or are you more of that where it's like, obviously you want it to sound good, but maybe the sooner the better we get out of the studio?
No, we have done that. We did that on this record. I try to like look at where I am and enjoy where I am. So if I'm in the studio, I try to go, all right, this is where I am. Let's make this a great experience, or let's really do some great work here. And if I'm on the road, I like to enjoy being on the road. I've been with people who, when they're in the studio, they want to be on the road, and when they're on the road, they want to be in the studio. That's no way to live. So, but at the beginning of a record, you're just like, oh man. And the more records you make, the more, this is going to take a while before I get to the end of it, and it can be like that first day of school can be really daunting. And you just kind of got to try to forget that. And, how long it takes. But a record like this that took so long, you can sort of lose the plot and your head can go up your own ass. And so you try to realize that sometimes your first instinct is just as good as your 10th instinct, So in the end, 20 years later, it's not going to matter. But I am glad we put in the extra effort for all this stuff, because I put on the headphones. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That vocal sounds cool. That guitar tone sounds cool. That snare is not like any other snare on the record. So, I like that.
No, I definitely, I think it, I think 20 years later, yeah, it still sounds really good. How about like writing in the studio? And I kind of want to talk about that because it sounds like you're in the studio for quite a while with this. But was much writing going on? Like, were these songs for the most part fleshed out and kind of ready to go by the time you got in the studio, or are you still kind of writing while in there and recording?
Yeah, I don't really believe in writing in the studio. I think usually what happens is you end up digging the sound of something, or you end up digging the groove, and then the song's kind of half-assed and you're like, this is great, and you're having a great time. Someone presses record, like, that song was easy. Maybe it was too easy, So I like to come to the studio with actual songs written. I'll still welcome and embrace adding things to those songs, or messing around with those songs and experimenting. But I like to make sure at least it's going to sound good on an acoustic guitar before you go in there.
Did you guys record this all in with like all that time recording? Was this all in one studio? Did you do everything in one place?
It was all in Andy Gerber's studio, Million Yen in Chicago. We had done an EP with him the previous year, which was our big breakup with any label that even smelled like a major label. And so we just did the No Fun EP, and that was a really liberating experience. And so we're like, all right, well, let's make another record. And we're looking around to who we should do it with. And Andy was like, let's just do it with me. I'm like, well, I don't really like to stay in the same place. He's like, well, maybe you should. And he was right. It's okay to stay in the same place sometimes.
Well, okay. So that's interesting. So before that, you kind of, it sounds like you don't like on this one, you kind of, like you said, stay in the same place. It's all right. But before that, you were more of like kind of change up producer from album to album. Like, is that kind of, am I taking that right? Like that? Like, yeah, let's not go to the well a second time for the next.
Right. Exactly. You want to learn things, and I wanted to work with as many people as we could and do as many different things as we could while we still had, the money being given to us by major labels. And so, like, rather than work with somebody that I didn't care about, some hot new producer, I'm like, I want to work with Jack Douglas. I want to see how he makes records. I want to get in the same room with Roy Thomas Baker. I want to figure out what he was doing on those Queen records, So it was a thing where it's just like every record, it's like, I don't want to repeat success or whatever you would want to call it. If something works, great, let's find something else that works. Not the same thing that works. Let's not beat it into the ground. And I think there's too much of that. in anything.
On this one, like recording Whatever Happened to PJ Souls, is there anything that you can kind of think of that you learned while doing that? Because like I do like that. Do you feel like there was anything you picked up or learned, during the recording sessions of this that maybe you still use today, or does anything specific kind of pop out?
I don't know. I don't. I mean, I guess trusting yourself is the thing, but I don't know if there's anything that I learned, or other than to just maybe not drive people crazy when you're making a record. I mean, it really was painstaking, and I apologize to everybody that I made jump through so many hoops to make this record. I think it was worth it, but maybe other people don't. So it's important to realize that there are other people in the room with you.
Let's talk a little bit about the rig. I mean, like you were talking about, it sounds like you used a bunch of different stuff on this album. What were like some of the guitars, amps, pedals? Like what were some of the things you used on this album?
Well, my favorite amp that we used is this little tiny Roland amp that
really?
It was transistor amp, not a tube at all. And I got some of my favorite guitar tones on the record. And there's a song called Halcyon Days. I love the guitar tone on. I used it for the choruses on PJ Souls. It's super crazy overdriven. And I've probably blown that particular amp 3 or 4 times. And I love it. It's my favorite. And also a friend of mine had given me this keyboard. I think it was a Texas Instruments keyboard or something. It's just huge, and it had all these crazy sounds on it. So there's a lot of insane sounds on the record that are from this keyboard. We would just go flipping through the thing and go, this sounds interesting, let's put it on. I mean, even things that you think aren't keyboards on the record, like there's sort of like a elephant trumpet blast in the song called Buffalo Trace, and that was all just found on this keyboard that we had.
That's so cool. I like those little the little just things that, listening to it, you may not realize that's what you're playing. I like kind of get into that stuff.
I had a few toys in the studio. I had this GT5 effect pedal, and we put everything through that: drums, vocals, guitars. So between that keyboard and that little Roland amp, it was just, we were just abusing all that stuff.
And I'm trying to think of the era, 2004. I mean, was this recorded on Pro Tools? Was this analog? Like, what was this recorded on?
It was recorded on Pro Tools. But what we would do is we kept, and who knows if this even mattered, but we kept bouncing it back to tape.
Oh, okay.
And then we bounce it back. So we were trying to get the warmth of tape. I don't know if it worked. I mean, to this day, Andy and I still don't know if it did anything, but we tried.
I do have to ask, because I mean, I feel like anyone I talk to, especially music producers of that era, sometimes Pro Tools was a monster in itself. I mean, was that ever an issue? Because I have talked to people who around that era you're talking about, that thing gave them some real trouble. Sometimes that shit would crash constantly.
Yeah, that would happen. I mean, we started using Pro Tools on the third record, on Pack Up the Cats. It was all recorded analog, but there's a lot of like editing and conversations going on throughout that record. And so we edited the record together on Pro Tools. Like in one room, Nick DiDia is mixing, doing all the heavy mixing, and in the other room, I'm in there with somebody else putting the record together on Pro Tools. So I had experience with that. But by the time we got to PJ Souls, it was like, it would be too expensive to make a record on tape at that point. And it was cheaper. And I would have loved to continue to make a record on tape, but we just couldn't afford it. Not the way we were making that record. No.
Is there any, kind of getting back to gear for a second, is there any kind of like old trusty, be it like a guitar or a pedal or like an amp that you've used on almost like all Local H recordings? Do you have anything like that in your rig where it's like almost on every album you record?
Maybe. I mean, the live guitar I play is probably on every record since As Good as Dead. I like this little crappy Ibanez guitar that I bought for $150 way back in the day. I like that, but I really don't I don't care. I really, I mean, there is one pedal that usually finds its way onto every record, and it's a DoD phaser pedal. And anytime you hear phasing going on from the guitar on one of the records, that's probably what it is.
It's probably that thing.
Yeah.
What touring look like for this album? I mean, did you guys tour a lot? Who'd you go on the road with? How soon after the record did you guys go hit the road?
Pretty soon after. Like, that was, we were getting to a point where I remember reading a review and somebody was saying that, like a shark, I kept touring in order to stay alive. I had to keep moving. And I like that. But that meant like every time a record would come out, we'd almost go on tour the next day. Which took people a while to sort of catch up with the records. So here we are touring for PJ Souls, and I don't think anybody really knows the songs. And when we go on tour for a record, we don't just play 2 or 3 songs. We're playing at least half of that record on that tour. So, there's some people who are down with hearing new songs, and then there's a lot of people who aren't, and those people might not come back. But I mean, you got to do what you got to do, So hopefully the people that weren't ready for those songs 20 years ago will come back this fall and be ready.
I was wondering.
It's a shame it takes 20 years, but whatever.
I was wondering that too, kind of speaking of, because I mean, I know on top of, touring and stuff, you are going to be doing that PJ Souls show at the Metro in Chicago. Like, how much of this record has been, and I'll be honest, and you may catch me for a loop, and maybe you've played this album front to back live, but I mean, how much of this album hasn't been played live before? I mean, there are any songs that still you haven't touched or haven't played that, I mean, this is going to be the first time it's played at the Metro in October?
We've played them all live. It might be the first time they're all played at the Metro live, but we did this tour. It's called the Six Angry Records Tour, and we put all of our records in a hat. And so before the show, take the hat out, somebody would pick a record, and then that would be the record we'd have to play. So PJ Souls got picked. It got picked a few times. And then during COVID, we sort of did the same thing, but it was like you could pick any one of our records, and we're going to play that live from our practice space at COVID. And PJ Souls won. It beat all the other records. And so that was probably the last time it's not. It's the second to last time it's been performed in its entirety. The last time was New Year's Eve a few years ago. The opening band had dropped out because they got COVID, or they were afraid of COVID. I can't remember what. And so I went up there with an acoustic guitar. I said, I'll play any one of the records. Which one should it be? And PJ Souls, unfortunately, overwhelmingly, was the big choice. It was a tough one to play on acoustic guitar, but I did it. So that was the last time it's been performed.
What are kind of the, when you're, you can't play the album front to back, what would you say are the live staples off this album throughout the years? What are the songs on this album you think you've played live the most?
I mean, it's changed over the years. I mean, Buffalo Trace is sort of like a centerpiece jam for us in our shows. California Songs sort of became the hit, quote unquote, off the record. For a long time we were playing Hey Rita. I don't know, the Heavy Metal Bake Sale. I mean, this is a record that we kind of left alone for a while, and we would play maybe California Songs and maybe Buffalo Trace, and that would be about it. But we've been getting the songs back into rotation and lately at the shows, and it's a lot of fun to play.
It sounds like throughout the last 20 years, like, have you seen from a fan perspective, like, the general consensus of this album change? Like, I mean, have you seen it be, I guess, more, I'm taking it more favorable as the years go on?
Yeah, yeah. Like, like I said, I think when it first came out, people didn't like. They're like, it's too lo-fi. The drums they're not big enough. And we would just come off of working with Jack Douglas and Roy Thomas Baker. I'm like, the drums can't get any bigger, guys. I mean, those are the best guys in the biz for big drums. It's going to sound like fucking Def Leppard at that point. You can't get any bigger. So there was a lot of complaints about the way the record sounded. And, there were a few people who took issues with, the fact that some of the songs only have 2 choruses. They're not quite full songs. There's a bunch of stuff going on. Somebody took issue with no one knows who PJ Souls is. Why would you make a record about PJ Souls? It's just so it was a bunch of criticism based on the fact that this record wasn't the last record, and probably they weren't too crazy about the last record when that came out either. So I mean, you can either make records for people that have that it's going to take a while for them to catch up, or you can make a record for what you want to do and for people that have quick reaction times.
I don't know. For me, historically, I think albums that don't hit the first, that I'm like, I should probably listen to that a few more times. Yeah, I think historically, those are the ones I love later on. Some of the ones that I like instantly, I feel like I almost forget about. I notice there's albums where if I say my top 5 albums of the year, I feel like if you ask me 5 years later, I don't know that I'm always listening to all those. That instant, it's been out for 4 months, sometimes changes when it's been out for 4 years, for good and bad.
Yeah, man.
But
yeah,
are you that way with?
I agree, absolutely. And I think there's this thing that goes on where people are like, it's almost a pride thing. It's like I smelled this was a piece of shit right away, and so they're not going to change their mind. It's like, I knew right away that this sucked, and it's like, just swallow your pride and listen to the record again. It might get better. I mean, there was this thing when I was a kid, like if I bought a record from a band and I didn't like it, I was shit out of luck. I'd still spent the money on this record. I don't know how much they were, $8 or $9. I'd spent the money on this record, so I better figure out a way to like it. So I would listen to records over and over, and then that turned me on to a lot of different things. And I think movies are the same way. Too many people are like, sucked. Yeah, but what about this? Nah, I know better than them. Maybe you don't know better than the piece of art that's trying to tell you something.
Oh, 100%.
Maybe.
I agree with that 100%. I do. And I think, people are reactionary and also just compare things. Like you were saying earlier too, sometimes people just don't like it because it's not the album from before. And it's like, that doesn't mean it's not good. It just means it's something different. Let it sit for a minute. How about this album for you over 20 years? Has your relationship changed in any way? However that means, you as the guy who wrote it, has your relationship with PJ Souls changed at all in 20 years? I mean, has that kind of stayed consistent, or have your feelings been different on and off throughout the years towards this one?
Pretty consistent. When we finished it, I had to get away from it because, it was pretty difficult to make. And then even the release of it was strained. They screwed up the cover, and, there's all these things that was like, man, and the guy running the label turned out to be not too cool. So there were a lot of things I just didn't want to deal with it, but I don't ever really recall a period not liking the record. Like I had when at the end of Here Comes the Zoo, where I was like, oh, I fucked up. This is not a good record. I don't really feel that way about the record. And I always kind of felt like this is about as good as I could do. And I'd still feel that way after all these years. And that was the best I could do.
Where does it kind of sit? And I don't know. I mean, sometimes artists don't like playing favorites. Sometimes they right away have favorites. I mean, where does this one kind of sit in your catalog? You obviously have quite a few.
One.
Number one?
It's number one. Yeah. My favorite. It's my favorite record that we've made.
I mean, I really do think it's one of your best. So yeah, from the outsider, I didn't write it, but yeah, I think it's some of your best work as well as 20 years later.
Well, thank you.
But
yeah, I mean, this is the one that, you know, it's all in there. It's we try to do that all the time, but this one really, it's all in there. You know, there's nothing else left after this one.
Going back to, I mean, you have such an extensive catalog. When you're making a set list, I mean, has that gotten hard over the years trying to like represent a little bit of every album? You know, does that ever become an issue? Because that seems like a pain in the ass the more albums you have.
It is tough. It's tough if you feel that need to represent everything every night. I don't really feel that need anymore because, like, we'll be back, and these things are cyclical. And while we might represent one record more this time, the next time it could be a different record. You know, I mean, what we do is we'll go into the venue, we'll look around, we'll do sound check, we'll check out, you know, our social media pages, see if anybody's requesting a song. And about maybe an hour before showtime, we'll have a set list together. You know, it changes every night, and and we're open to suggestions. So if there's something you really want to hear, we'll figure out a way to stick it in there.
Wow, so you're pretty good with your catalog then. If someone yells one out, there is a good chance you know it. It's not like,
as long as they don't mind us screwing it up, we're totally fine with it. You know, it's fine. I don't mind a mistake if you don't.
It's the fun of a live show, in my opinion.
Yep.
It's live, baby. Yep. You know, I do want to bring up too, just a couple more here for you. But I mean, this reissue of Whatever Happened to PJ Souls, I mean, I know it's coming out on a couple different formats, and there's some kind of neat like merch coming out with that too. I mean, you can kind of talk about that a little bit. What you know, what's kind of all coming out to celebrate 20 years of this album?
I mean, there's the double vinyl, which sounds great. We got cassettes.
Nice.
You know, okay, there you go. We've got CDs. There's a DVD, and most importantly, there are PJ Souls socks, and this is the crown jewel of the onslaught of merch.
You know, that album cover too, I honestly think it's also one of your best album covers. I mean, were there any like alternative, like, you know, ones you almost picked over that, or was that another one where it was pretty instant? Because I feel like that just it fits everything together really nice.
No, Kai Arendz, he knocked it out of the park, and he knew exactly what I wanted to do, and he knew what it should look like. And you know, he's a rock and roll high school fan as well, so there was never any doubt about what this should be. I don't even know if I told him what to do. You know, I was just like, it's Whatever Happened to PJ Souls. And I think he just said, I got it. And, you know, that was pretty much it.
Nice. No, I really do. One of your best albums, one of the coolest album covers as well. You also, just for a little plug for you as well, outside the band, I know you do. I've been checking out a couple episodes, but the Local H podcast, Lifers, that you do. How long have you been doing that podcast?
Oh, it would have had to have been, I don't know. I mean, we're at 187, 88 episodes.
Holy shit.
You do the math. I mean, we've been doing one every week. So, you know, that's how long we've been doing them.
I'm kind of interested in this, like, for you as obviously you have quite the creative outlet with music. Doing something like that podcast, I mean, do you get any kind of creative satisfaction out of that? Is that I don't know if it's compared to the same creative satisfaction of doing music, but I do think that's interesting because it's still a creative outlet. Do you get any kind of like creative satisfaction from doing that? Or is that just kind of more of a, I don't know, fun hobby kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's more a fun hobby thing. I mean, I'm proud of the show, and I think it's a good listen, and I think it's funny, and I enjoy talking to my friends. I think sometimes we've got guests on there that you really do learn something. And I mean, that at its highest level should be what we're going for. But at its lowest level, you know, we make jokes about poop. You know, I mean, it's just the spectrum and the gamut and everything in between. I mean, it's fine. It's fun. Like I said, it's an excuse to talk to my friends every week. Yeah, doing that. We got the Lifers movie coming out
Oh,
soon.
really?
Yeah. So got a lot of stuff in the bag.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, what else as we start kind of closing this out, what else do you kind of have the rest of the year for people to be on the lookout for? We're like the halfway point of this year. We got the tour, the reissue. You know, what should we tell people to go check out now?
Well, this reissue campaign feels like it's been going on forever. So it's finally going to come out, and we're going to do some shows around it. Maybe not all the shows that everyone wishes we were going to do, but, you know, relax. It's going to be good. And like I said, the Lifers movie that I've been working on for 3 years is finally going to come out. Talking to some theaters about putting that out this year. So look for that. And I think that's enough. I don't want to do anymore.
That is fine. I mean, where online, where can we find you online? Any of that, you know, plug away, any websites where we can find Local H, all of that good stuff. Where do we go?
Just all the stuff, you know, all the places where you would find stuff. Where you know, your mom has you know, place where
Google
wherever your mom posts pictures, we're probably on that platform.
Well,
wherever
perfect.
your jerky cousin,
You'll find Local H as well.
You'll find Local H, yeah.
All right. Well, as we close this out, if people are listening to podcasts, go get that reissue. The radio show is 3 hours long. We will play PJ Souls after this. So people listening, some people, if they listen to the radio show, will play it front to back. So, I mean, as we go, any closing words on the album, anything in general to close out on, anything else to let the good people know before we close this one out?
Put on some headphones, and, you know, it's an hour. The record's an hour long, almost to the second. And just, you know, I don't know, smoke them if you got them.
It'll be a good listen. And we have it'll make that hour very easy for me, because I won't have to do much besides play the record. So you just made a very easy hour after this for me. But Scott, it's been a blast talking to you. Been a fan forever. Again, 20-year reissue of the 2004 classic, Whatever Happened to PJ Souls. That'll be out September 13th. You got the fall tour. And if you're in Jamestown, Buffalo and Cleveland is right up the road. You got shows September 15th and 16th. And yeah, I'm Anthony Merchant talking to Scott Lucas right here on the Power Chord Hour.